Welcome to Snakes and Otters, a pointless discussion of eternal questions. Get ready, we're about to live in your head rent-free. Welcome to episode 121. I am Martin.
And I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis.
So today's episode, Otterites, is an Our Heroes. And this is, we keep saying this, that Francis and I keep squeezing things onto the schedule.
One of these days, I'm going to take over that schedule, and we are going to do like 2 years worth of stuff for me.
Yes,
Go right ahead. Go right ahead.
2 years of Robert episodes, but this is one that I put on the schedule as Our Heroes was Frederick Douglass. And the backstory to wanting to put Douglass on the schedule is we're still fairly recently returned from our very epic road trip to Springfield, Illinois.
Right.
For the Abraham Lincoln Museum and Presidential Library.
And Tomb.
And the Tomb.
Yes.
And it struck me that in their White House diorama for the presidential years of Lincoln, that the figures, I guess they were wax figures or whatever, the figures that were out there in this diorama, of course, were Grant and Sherman, but equal to them was Frederick Douglass.
Mm-hmm.
So it really put a kind of a hook that, hey, you know, this is maybe a guy that doesn't pop first to mind when you think of these years, but here he is, and that's a signal he's important. And he really was. This was not just, oh, well, we better find, like, somebody other than these two white generals to put out here. Douglass was very important.
That's right. Yeah, this is not
very
not adding him in after the fact.
Right.
Or trying to elevate him to something he was not. He was.
Didn't they have a Harriet Tubman figure as well?
Was it Tubman or was it Sojourner Truth that was out there?
Sojourner Truth. That's
correct.
right.
Yes.
So
I knew there was one, but I couldn't remember.
Yeah,
which
there's one more. That was the four, wax figures.
Yes. But before you enter the front door of the
Yeah.
White House, they're actually like on the porch, and you can see them life size.
Right.
And
it's not to say that black people were kept out of the White House. It was just those are the figures were in front. There really weren't a whole lot of figures in the White House,
other than Mary Todd herself when you first walk in. That's
right.
That's really it.
So it's not like the thing. There's a separation there intentionally.
Yeah, no, it was staged as here's someone who was welcome at the White House.
Exactly.
Right
Yes.
there.
Very much so.
And then, like you said, the next figure was his wife. It was Mary Todd. And then the next figures was the cabinet.
Right.
And the cabinet room diorama. So it really fit in. It was so well done. Again, the Lincoln Library Museum, very impressive. If you're within a day's drive, take it and go see it.
It is well worth it. Absolutely.
So that also then stirred the memories of the Ken Burns Civil War, where the thoughts and words of Frederick Douglass played a role.
Right. I mean, he used many for that, but Douglass was one of the preeminent voices that was used, and it worked so well. I mean, it was not that he was not a token by any means. His words were some of the most poignant and powerful that Burns selected, and that's
we talked about
matters.
Talk about this in the show prep. The man really was a towering intellect.
Yes,
it is astounding. The intellect that was born into that environment, and the fact that when you think about the environment that he was born into, slavery is not just abject poverty for slaves in so many ways, but it's especially an intellectual poverty.
Yeah,
because you're not allowed to learn to read and write. You're not allowed to learn much of anything
other than your tasks you must perform. That's
right.
all.
Because one of the quotes of Douglass out of the book that I was reading by David Blight, Pulitzer-winning biography. I don't have it in front of me, so I may mangle this, but education is the enemy of slavery.
Yes. Slave owners who attempted to teach slaves anything, even just rudimentary reading and writing, were often outcast by their peers and neighbors.
Right.
Said, no, you can't do that.
Right.
They're going to learn there's a world outside of picking cotton or cleaning the house, and then we can't have that.
Exactly. It's a tacit admission, even though they either don't realize it or don't like to admit it, that you are subjugating other men unjustly.
Right.
Because if you treat them like yourself, it's impossible to keep them slaves. That's a
I like that we've already got like enormous meaning 5 minutes in. Well done,
Right.
Robert.
That's
well
right. That's
well
right.
done. Oh my goodness. So if you're unfamiliar Otterites, and I can't imagine Otterites would be unfamiliar with Frederick Douglass. It's just not a picture I have. But Douglass was born a slave, mid-Atlantic area, Maryland, I think is primarily where he grew up. But it would come to be not just educated, but a real intellectual force in the 1850s, 60s, and beyond.
Yeah.
Wrote 3 autobiographies. Let me get the right names here. So I've got them pulled up. Narrative Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave, from 1845. My Bondage and My Freedom, from 1855. And Life of Times of Frederick Douglass, first published in 1881, and then revised several times. He kind of kept tinkering with that last biography.
All of these are obviously in the public domain, so they are freely available. So, for instance, I found my 3 copies, which I have yet to dive into, because they're written in the style of the 19th century, which means they are not quick reads.
No.
Right, yeah.
They would be very much a Melville,
Right.
Nathaniel Hawthorne, you're hip deep in language,
Exactly.
run-on sentences almost kind of thing.
Yeah, when
right?
your first sentence is like 3 paragraphs long, you know you're in for a long ride.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's what his was, but it's deep, thick, meaty prose. But I found them on Apple Books, and so they're freely available.
Free, absolutely. Yeah.
And I'm sure you can find them on Kindle. It's free copies as well.
Quite
Google
the boon,
Books, if nothing else.
Yeah, quite the boon to scholarship.
Yes,
I'm sure. So, and again, not just a writer, but an orator.
One of the most in-demand speakers of his time.
Yes, toured all over the United States. Of course, first the North.
The North, yes.
But eventually,
when
even
it was
out
safe.
West, yeah. But even the story of him escaping to freedom is just so incredible. He just kind of hopped on a train in Baltimore and rode till he was in New York.
Right. And there's a lot of things that worked out to history's advantage.
Yeah.
Being born where he was and when he was. So he's born in the northernmost state of slavery. So, Maryland is a slave state. It doesn't leave the Union, partially because Lincoln makes sure that doesn't happen.
Suspends habeas corpus.
Pretty much jails the entire legislature of Maryland so that they can't secede.
Right.
Because he couldn't let them secede, because then the capital of the United States would be in Confederate territory.
Yeah, surrounded by enemies.
Sometimes practicality takes precedence over all other concerns.
Right. So, that's one. It's one technically illegal thing we are certainly willing to forgive Lincoln for doing. Because that would have been a horrible, horrible thing to have to do.
Oh yes, dogs and cats living together.
Mass hysteria.
Yes.
But being Maryland, it was had much more of a northern flavor than even Virginia, just south to it.
Yes.
It wasn't exactly entirely a northern state, but it wasn't entirely an agrarian state either. Baltimore especially was an international trade port. It was a shipbuilding port. It was one of the biggest.
Lots of industry there as well.
Yeah. So there's a lot of abolitionist thinking that's a lot more prevalent there than there would have been just one state to the south. And I think that's a very lucky circumstance.
It's more tied in the rail network. It's more
Yes.
tied in the communication network to northern states than Virginia or North Carolina would have been.
Exactly. So it really enabled him to get away a lot easier than it might have. If he were coming out of Georgia, probably wouldn't have made it.
It's too far to go.
Yeah.
It's too far to go.
But like you said, you just hop on a train and you stay on it until New York. It's easy.
Yeah.
And
it was one day.
And you get, from what I was reading in Blight's book, because he talks about this. There's blacks going around, slaves going from one location to another. I mean, his own mother used to walk 12 miles to come see him, and she didn't get in trouble for that. When you think of the miniseries Roots, which we all grew up with, in our
it was a major
late
thing when we
adolescence.
were kids.
That's not conceivable from what is portrayed there. And it's not that either one is wrong, it's just different parts of the country. And slavery was handled differently, apparently. So it was much easier for him to get on that train. And, we have well benefited for him being born in Maryland. He, not to take over where you're going with this, but one of the other things that was great about where he was is that his owner lent him out, for lack of a better term, to this family in Maryland, in Baltimore. And the woman who was the matriarch of the house, she treated him much like her own son. And he basically grew up with her son. They were good friends. And, it's one of those things where farther south, nearly impossible for this to happen. She taught him the basics of reading, and then he took it on from there. And, once you're taught your ABCs and your numbers and what all the sounds the letters make, if you work at it, you can figure out the rest on your own.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much what he has done. And without her, it would have been a much harder way to go for him. And so, again, you open up literature, reading, and you expand the mind exponentially. And his was definitely ripe for it. It was a lot of mind to expand into. He's a towering intellect. I really can't say enough about that.
Yeah. So you brought up your book here in Honor Rights. As you know, Snakes and Otters were all about grabbing the books and knowing what you're talking about because it's been written. It's out there. So this is Frederick Douglass by David W. Blight.
Yeah, Prophet of Freedom. Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom, which absolutely.
I mean, great subtitle.
Yeah. This is a Pulitzer Prize winning biography. However, even though you're only into it just a touch, you're a little unsatisfied with it.
I am. I hate to speak ill of any author who's put together a good book, because the book is not bad.
Right.
But in many ways it seems to be a fawning, Martin, as you put it, it's just a blatant hagiography of Douglass. And it's not that I think he should have been negative about Douglass, but I think it's such a flowery, fangirl kind of biography. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
That's my problem with it.
Yeah.
I think he could have done just as good of a job with the facts. I mean, let's face it, they're all known. It's not like this is new territory.
Again, there's a ton of available research. The biographies are in the public domain, so there's tons of research. The texts of speeches are out there. His interactions with Lincoln and with other figures.
There's lots of primary source material.
There's things that could be
That's right.
dug
Yeah,
into.
so a biography itself, by the kind of definition, it's all about the whim or the tone or the approach of the biographer to take all that data and make it into in a new, fresh manner.
Some kind of compelling narrative of some kind. And to me, the book, while having some really great stuff in there, especially these first few chapters that I read sequentially, were just a little difficult to get through because there was just so much praise and glory, for lack of a better word. I mean, it was, and again, it's not that what he was saying about Douglass was untrue.
Right.
It was just so effervescent in its praise, fawningness that it was offsetting to me. It was just very off-putting in the read.
We prefer a little bit more neutrality in our biographies. Is that fair?
I think that's fair.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Because, and I haven't read all of it because I started skipping around.
Right. You said that you're not very far into it, but this really hit you right off the jump.
Yeah.
That it just seemed way too sycophantic.
Right. So I started jumping around.
I love that word.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a great word.
We bow to you. That's you nailed, as usual. Martin has nailed it in one word that we've been circling the drain for 10 minutes. That's exactly it. That's the problem.
We love our $10 words here at Snakes and Otters.
Well, they're worth every penny. Absolutely.
So it almost is sycophantic in some ways. As we talked about, it's almost like a virtue signaling of in writing. Saying hey, look at me. I'm really praiseworthy of this guy over here. Maybe you should consider me for awards.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's what the guy's doing. I don't want to put those motivations into him because maybe he writes all of his books like this.
Yeah. We don't want to jump into impugning his motivations. seeking a prize.
Because he's done a good job with the book. So the John Brown chapter that I skipped to, really good. Really good examination. It's a little bit more concrete, I guess you could put.
Okay.
There's still a little bit of that. Still a little bit of over-the-topness, but not nearly as bad as those early chapters where he's laying out some of the groundwork.
This is very different in approach, I'm guessing here, than, say, a Ron Chernow would be.
Yeah, or David McCullough, Joseph Ellis.
All those
are two of my favorites.
Really wonderful biographers that have done multiple books on different great historical figures, and themselves won Pulitzer Prizes.
Yes.
This is different, though.
Yeah, it's just a slightly different tone that, when you're expecting somebody like a McCullough, an Ellis, or a Chernow, and you approach this, it's just very, very unusual. Or the Lincoln book that I was reading prior to the Lincoln episode. Another book that got high praise. I only got one a Pulitzer, but it was
White's book.
Yeah,
which is kind of like the standard at the moment. Every few decades,
every generation will have a
new one that comes out. And,
so it's a contemporary book of, or it's not a contemporary book of this, but it's given the same regard.
Right.
Let's put it that way, and it's a much more compelling style to me because it's just laying it out in a good narrative form, telling the story, which he's doing, but there's just so much more to it than I think is necessary. So again, it's worth getting. I just want to, if you're like us and you expect your historical books to be a certain way, you might be a little surprised at this. So it'll take a little bit more effort to get through.
It's
some
not
of those.
wrong. It's just we were not expecting it.
Right. So it is worth reading, but you got to know what you're getting into. I mean, it's 700 pages of content. That's a lot for a biography.
Well, because Douglass had so much that's available.
So much available.
So many of these historical characters that we mentioned, primarily from American history, it's only 200 years. You've got the data for a lot of these folks. I mean, and a lot of times it's first person primary, like Ulysses S. Grant. You got his memoirs, for goodness sakes. Douglass wrote 3 of himself. That's kind of where a lot of this starts. And then from there, you move forward into what all the other people said. And, there's fruitful ground.
Absolutely.
So we're going to have to definitely have you, once you finish, give us a more full appraisal once you get to the end. But, I mean,
maybe if not on an episode, put that on the blog.
A blog would be great.
Snakesnotters.com.
That's right.
Yes, blog posts,
Martin Mondays,
Wobbert Wednesdays, and Francis Fridays.
That's right.
I have to prod the fellas a little bit. I think we've been 3 weeks maybe without a Wobbert Wednesday and 2 weeks without a Francis Friday.
Well, and the last post I did, I kind of tacked on to Francis Friday. So
that's okay.
It wasn't even really
inspiration comes when it comes, and I like to kind of try and pull up with something that maybe we touched on but didn't really go very deep with, or what's going on in the world.
Yes, you're very good at the what's going on in the world.
Well,
stuff.
and I'll kind of give you the peek behind the curtain. I do get the History Channels, every day of This Day in History, which I'm kind of thinking around that sort of stuff.
No wonder he's so good at that. He's got to cheat.
Well, that's
well, I do too, because I hit the Wikipedia This Day in History and find interesting things. But sometimes it's just on the ride home from work. I'm with Mrs. Martin, and it's like, I got to have something today. What do you want me to... Give me some ideas. Okay, hamburgers. I'm on
it. Absolutely, yeah. Hey, it's we do what we do.
That's right. That's right. So back to Douglass, though.
Well, yes. Just at some point, you'll have to do a post and give us a more full review.
I will. Yes.
Of David W. Blaine. Again, this is a Yale guy. Should be a very capable biographer and writer.
Yes, and like I said, and
it has won multiple prizes, including the Pulitzer.
And you can't BS your way into all of those prizes without being good.
Yeah. So it just goes to show, though, that just because you win a prize doesn't mean you're impressing everybody.
Exactly, and we do have incredibly high standards here at Snakes and Otters.
Snakes and Otters, yes, it's a high bar.
That's right.
It's the 15-foot pole vault bar. Is that a? Oh no. I guess the current record is more like 20 foot, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's closer to 20, yeah. I don't know what it is, but it's definitely higher than 15, yeah. So, and we do set a high bar, and, that's because we expect greatness from others.
Mm-hmm. Especially when we're laying down our dough for it.
That's right.
Because have you bought a biography lately? A full price one's $30.
That's right. I got this at Sam's, so I got this, which retails at $22 because it's the trade paperback size.
Yes.
So I got it for like $16.
Yeah.
Yep.
But yeah, if I'd gotten the hardcover, $30 easily. And
but those hardcovers look so good on
they
the shelf,
do.
gentlemen.
But when you're shopping at Sam's and you see that $15 copy, that's hard to pass
Oh,
up.
absolutely,
The
yeah.
trade
Especially
paperbacks are still good on the shelf.
They are because they do a really nice job. It looks just like the hardcover is going to be. It's not glossy, but it still has the nice looking spine, and
absolutely.
that's the thing.
And the only thing about the trade paperbacks is when I travel, they often get very beat up.
Yes, I
Doggone
loaned the boy, the male spawn, my copy of Hamilton, which he liked.
Oh, good.
He liked quite a bit. He didn't like 1776, but he liked Hamilton. Okay, fine, whatever. He thought 1776 was boring.
And that's quite the book to take on.
Yeah, he did this a couple of years ago.
In grade school.
At 12.
Yeah, it would have been
13.
in the 8th grade when he read it.
Yeah, age 13. That's...
So, 12.
Yeah.
Because remember, he's a year ahead. So, because he skipped kindergarten. Because so out of rights, I don't know if I've told this story, but since we're
I don't
on
think
it,
so. I don't
So-
think
I love this story about my son. He is really, really brilliant. I mean, all my kids are smart. He's definitely at the top, and there's nothing against either of the other two. And he is so he's in pre-K, because it's not just enough that you have kindergarten. You're gonna have pre-K, which is just another way to get money out of us parents, in my opinion. Although for many people who don't have the ability to take care of their kids at home before school, pre-K and kindergarten is actually cheaper than daycare. When you send them off to Catholic school. Anyways, so he comes home around Christmas time one day in pre-K, and his response to school was, "How much longer do I got to go to school? I already know all this stuff." So, we're looking at this, and if we had stayed in the school we were, we'd already talked to the principal and the teachers, and they were going to let him skip a grade. They were going to let him skip kindergarten and go straight into first grade because, he was reading when he was in pre-K.
Yeah.
So, and not just faking it. He was actually reading. And he really was well ahead of kindergarten. He did not need it at all. He might have been able to go into second grade. The kid he just picks things up so well. But yeah, how much longer do I got to go to school? I already know all this stuff.
Well, time to assign him some physics homework.
I'm telling you, he's, I don't know what to do with him sometimes because the things that I would love for him to get into, he has no interest.
Oh, yes. The apples may not fall far from the trees, but they certainly are not exactly the same fruit.
Yeah, exactly. And, and the thing is, they have fallen from the trees, so...
That's right, yeah.
You can't force them to be interested in the same things you are.
Yeah.
No, it's not going to happen.
All right.
But anyways.
Enjoy it when it happens, because it does occasionally.
Well, this feels like a good spot for a quick break and discuss what we're going to be pouring here. We're at Studio M.
That's right, 30th floor of the Nakatomi Tower.
Yes, relaxing and doing our recordings for this week. So I think I'm going to be pouring a glass of Woodford Reserve here shortly.
Oh, I love Woodford. It's kind of like the standard in many respects. The one that you can, like they say, drag the phaser through the mud and it still fires every time. You were wondering where Star Trek was going to come in, folks. There we go.
Yeah, I don't think they were wondering.
That's using a tire iron to make a crack in the wall there to shove some Star Trek content into Frederick Douglass, but
hey, it's
a ruling from the judges will allow it.
We'll allow it.
We'll
allow it.
It's a gift, gentlemen.
Gift, curse, whatever.
It's one of those gifts that's kind of like the sweater that doesn't fit and it's all itchy. You might want to just put that back in the box.
Nah.
Or, maybe it's like that ugly Christmas sweater. You don't have to bring it out every time. But, there is a place for it. There is a place for it.
This is true.
So, you're right, though. The Woodford really is, it's, for us at least, I think it is certainly one of, if not the top standard that everything gets judged by.
That's right. It's one of those go-to places.
Yeah. I like the double oaked, obviously, because I think it's just adds that subtle difference in taste and flavor that is so good. I think it's a little bit more smoky than the.
It is.
The
It's
standard.
got a little bit more depth, but it's not as clean as the Woodford. There's a difference between the regular Woodford and the double oaked.
Well, I think it's still very smooth.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
that's right. They're definitely siblings.
Oh yes,
And that's a good thing.
yeah. If you're not somebody who drinks bourbon, one, why not?
Right.
Two, you may not understand, or if you're just a indiscriminate kind of drinker, where you just slug it back, you may not understand what smooth really means when we're talking about adult beverages.
That sounds so Philistine. Just throw it back.
Yeah, well, yes. Anybody who slugs back a shot of bourbon really should be shot. It's just good bourbon.
Or castigated thoroughly.
Castigated
That's
thoroughly.
good.
Yes.
Very good. You're into this $25 words business here.
Yeah.
We upped it. It was $10. Now it's $25.
Yeah, excellent turn of phrase there, Martin.
That's right.
Excellent. Smoothness really, to me, is the key. That is how I judge most of my bourbons. How smooth is it? How does it go down? The second is, where's what I call the burn? Where does it hit the palate? Is it in the nose? Is it... Because the first time I had one, I don't remember which one it was that hit in that nasal area first, was a surprise. Because mostly they're in the throat or down the esophagus and the stomach. And this one, whatever that one was, and there's been a couple now that we've encountered that have had that, and that's very interesting. I really like how, even though it's all bourbon, it's so very different. To me, it's just fascinating how this America's spirit can be so different across.
You raise a good point, because when we drink bourbon here on the show, we drink it for the moment. We drink it for the effects of what we have at the moment, not what it does to us later.
True. Yes.
And that's a fair, very important distinction.
We are very much sensualists when it
Oh
comes
yes,
to bourbon.
thank you, Dr. Leonard McCoy. You're exactly right. You bet your ass, Spock. That's right.
Yes.
There's like what is it? There's like a Greek philosophical school about that kind of thing.
Yes.
Too.
Epicureans.
Yes.
Ding,
Yes.
ding, ding, ding,
ding. We have a winner.
Thank you for my wonderful background and philosophy from Bellarmine and St. Minor.
Yes, that's
Right
exactly.
up.
We're Epicureans when it comes to our bourbon.
Yes.
Benefits of a classical education.
Yes, I see. I was going to allow you that one. I could have gone there, Hans, but we'll let you do that.
All right. Well, that's very good. I guess that's going to be unanimous then. It's Woodford all around.
That's right. Yeah. We could sit and talk men's fashions all day long, but we have other things to do.
Yeah.
Yes. So
Back to Frederick Douglass.
So, I talked about this on one of the things. There are a couple of things that I wanted to bring in. I'm sure we all have points that we want to talk about. So, since it's our heroes, I think that's appropriate. We talk about the things that strike us about.
Yes, I mean, what gives this person meaning to our lives? Why is he worth examining
Yes.
and adopting into our fabric?
Exactly. So, two of the incidents, and I'll do one. We can go around and talk about this. Obviously, oops, sorry, forgot that my ring was on.
Silence.
Silence must fall.
All right, so you can tell we're not big editors.
No, we are not.
Once these are in the can, we run with them.
Yeah, there's only one thing we will edit out, and phones ringing is not that one thing.
No, please go ahead, Robert.
So, I mentioned a little bit earlier, but this towering intellect that to me fascinates me because of what it was born out of. The most unlikely, infertile ground, and this towering intellect grows like Jack's beanstalk. It's amazing that he was able to nurture it and grow it into what it became. And the beginning of that intellect, because it's not just the fact that he was a great orator or a writer, because that's part of it. He's very much about the words, and he's very much about what that does for his people. Because that's his tool.
Mm-hmm.
It's his tool. But this incident when he's very young, where he sees the old master basically abuse, not sexually abuse. It's not the way the description comes off in the book, but literally beating this girl in the kitchen one evening, and it either this is his projection onto what he saw as an 8 or 10-year-old from later in life, giving meaning to what he saw, but it stuck with him.
Yeah.
That it crystallized what it meant to be owned by somebody else, and that to me is just very striking. That one thing, had he never seen that, does it change history? That's how formative it seems to have been for him, and that's just so striking to me. The self-awareness, even at such a young age, and partially I'm sure that's because I have no concept of what it means to be a slave. I'm sure every slave was self-aware from the time that they were old enough to be told what to. I mean, every child is told what to do, but I'm sure when you're a slave, being told what to do has a lot different meaning.
Absolutely.
But that really seemed to crystallize the ownership aspect of it. There's one thing, we're all subject to the whims of others to a certain degree. When you're a slave, obviously, too, it's a much larger degree. But that one moment seemed to crystallize it. And that seems to be what set him down the road of, I got to get the hell out of here.
Yeah. The inherent unambiguosity. There we go.
Oh, very good. Very good.
Yes. Right. Of the nature of the institution that he was inside, victim of, whatever you want to call that, was very, very clear to him. But that's a reflection also of his intellect, even at that age.
Exactly.
He saw things, and like so many visionaries.
Because every slave probably saw one version or another of that same incident.
And yet he took it and did something very different with it.
Exactly.
Because of who he was.
Exactly. That's exactly the point. He saw something that every slave saw, but it sparked something in him that almost none of the others got, or at least almost no one else was able to act on.
Well, in many respects, he is a Moses figure.
Oh, absolutely.
And he's not the only one. There are many.
No, obviously,
but
there are others.
But he is a preeminent one. And it was, I loved how you mentioned that it's his words, this what he used. That was his talent, that was his God-given gifts. But wow.
Yeah, you've got to have the intellect to use the words.
Yes.
I mean,
that was if that's your moment, mine is very, very similar, but it's more of a broad one. It's the influence that he had with Lincoln in particular. Mm-hmm. And I do not want to paint Douglass only in relationship to Lincoln, by no means. But the two of them together made an amazing force for change. Because, as we've discussed in the Lincoln episode, Lincoln was certainly not pro-slavery by any means. He was against at the time, but he was not.
He was pro-union.
Pro-union.
That's the main thing.
But he was not an abolitionist in 1860 when he was elected. He was against.
He was not a political abolitionist.
That's correct.
But I think you have to say that he was an abolitionist because, as we talked about in the Lincoln episode, it was something that he came to definitely.
Oh yeah,
he was definitely against the institution of slavery.
Right.
But politically, he was not an abolitionist because
he didn't think it was possible at the time.
He didn't see a way to do it without destroying the Union.
Well, that's right, and that's of course where it ends up going. But it's Frederick Douglass more than any other person. Once he is president, Lincoln is president,
right,
that he basically tells him, he says, "You got to be able to take a stronger stance on this, and it's not for political reasons because it's the right thing to do."
Right, and Lincoln knew it was the right thing.
And Lincoln did. It was kind of like Douglass had to explain to him that not only is this the right thing to do, it's the possible thing to do.
Well, I think that's the thing, the possible.
Yes, that's right. He appealed to that political animal that Lincoln was so much of, and said, not only can you do this, it's the right thing to do politically. Because, the die, come on, Caesar, the die has been cast.
Yes, Douglass helped Lincoln understand that if you do the right thing, you can make the politics follow.
That's exactly right. And that's leadership, boys. That's leadership on both their parts.
Well said.
That's exactly it.
Well said.
All advances are like that. You do the right thing, and the politics... Now, sometimes the politics follow so closely that it looks like the politics are leading, but it's not. So you look at all the civil rights advances.
Yeah.
The right thing has been done, and it often has to be implemented with a political will. But when we say the politics will follow, we mean the grassroots.
That's correct.
And the society will change to conform to what we have said. This is the right thing.
Exactly, and therein lies the potential power inherent in democracy itself.
Well,
it's because the people want to be led into doing the right thing.
Okay, Loki.
That's right. Oh, very good, very good.
Well, I mean, not to put a negative spin on that, but
Yeah.
that's one of the things that Loki says. Mankind wants to be led. They want to have a strong leader.
Well, that's the beauty. He's not wrong.
He's not wrong.
That's right.
He's just, but he's right about what's.
He has the wrong destination in mind.
Yes,
we want to be led to fulfillment and liberty.
Yes, we want to be led to greater glory, not greater enslavement.
Right, exactly. So it's very good. That you pulled that one right out your ass there. But it was
it's a very fertile ass.
It was perfect because I didn't expect that one. That's for sure. But you're exactly right, because you hear about things all the time. Well, we have to change hearts first before we change the law. That's exactly the wrong approach. Exactly, because you have to.
Well, they kind of have to go hand in hand, but
they're not separated.
You have to have the political will to make it happen, the political capital to survive making it happen. But you've got to let the politics come along.
Because the only way to really change people's hearts over time is from that center, that red hot center.
When you're changing what is an obvious moral evil,
right?
But one that is so ingrained into fully
society.
half of the country's
right
mindset as far as blacks are slaves.
Their entire way of life, is dependent
and even
on
the North, they are not. For many they're still subhuman, but they're not slaves.
Well,
they don't want them around.
Yeah, they are property to be done with as we choose.
Well, even in the North, that's not necessarily the attitude, but they're still not us.
Yeah,
and so you have to set the right and good example, and it takes time. I mean, we're still not there fully. Some 150 years later, but it's a slow progression. And at some point, you do have to change the law at the political level to make sure that what is right is safeguarded. That's what the law is for, to safeguard what is right and true, not to impose willy-nilly the whims of a dictator.
Well, that's right, yeah. Well, I love, going back to Ken Burns' Civil War, of course, we've all seen it multiple times, I know. One of my favorite lines in there, and this is Burns himself speaking, because he does narrate some of the things, he says, and it may have been the first episode, the Civil War itself, at least in law, changed all that.
Yes.
Slavery. Remember that moment when he said that, and I'm thinking, brilliant. You're exactly right, because you had to have that happen, and the movie Lincoln supports this so very well. Steven Spielberg's, where you spend all that time on the 13th Amendment, which nobody knows anything about today, and explains. And Lincoln, so wonderfully played by Daniel Day-Lewis, he says, "No, we change it now, while we can, while we have the political capital to do it, because otherwise, if we don't." We're going to be doing it all over again.
Will be passed.
That's right, and things will never knit back together.
Yeah.
And it goes, that's why he had to have Alexander Stephens and Alexander Stephens and all the Confederates basically on a riverboat with Grant. We'll talk to you a little bit, but here, have a drink. That's the thing. No, we're not going to. And Grant pretty well tells him, no, you're not going to keep your slaves. Did you miss the point here?
Yeah. Did you miss what we've just done these last 4 years? The 600,000 dead.
That's right. Which lays it out very clearly. Sorry, guys, it really was about slavery. It's not all it was, but it was that.
Right. All the flowery stuff about states' rights. Well, what state right were they fighting for? There was one in particular.
That's right. Yeah. The states' rights. In the words of Michael Alfredo Garibaldi, horse hockey. Love that one myself.
So, and what strikes me about the effectiveness of Douglass as a leader is he is a powerful orator, but he uses that oratory in such a way as to convince people to come along. And he also understands at a very fundamental level the nature of his audience too. Mm-hmm. He understands that being a firebrand is great, but you can't insist on purity at the very first moment.
Right.
So much of what we do now in politics is very litmus test, ideological purity, and he was not that. He was a convincer, a persuader.
Oh.
And he knew if he could get part of what he needed, that's at least a good first step.
Right.
Yeah, it's kind of like in the movie Amadeus. You are passionate, Mozart, but you do not persuade. He was the opposite of that.
Yeah.
He was both. He was passionate and
Absolutely.
But
Yeah.
he knew how he could to control the passion in such a way as to...
It was not an all or nothing thing
right,
for him.
persuade. It was...
He directed that passion.
If I get a gradual
appropriately.
step, okay.
That's right.
I will keep working.
gives me-
And that was part of
The
his... The influence that he worked
he was playing the
on
long
Lincoln.
game.
Yes,
Long
playing
game.
a long game.
That's right.
And
But you know,
was-
the interesting thing...
he well, let me
Yeah.
me just finish. But he knew that it wouldn't be just enough to liberate slaves. He knew then, okay, to make them fully part of this society, then it was going to be, we need to put them in uniform. We need to put the black man in uniform. Because once they have those shiny brass buttons that say U.S., then they will be integrated into our society. So he knew first steps, he knew next steps, and he knew you had to take them one step at a time. You couldn't just jump to the end.
Right. And interesting thing about when he becomes an adult, when he's really working the abolition movement, because he's one of the key figures, obviously.
Absolutely.
And he's one that is willing to use whatever tool is available.
Yeah.
And this is one of the other things I found so very fascinating in Blight's book was the chapter on John Brown. So John Brown, he's obviously the famous abolitionist who was very involved in the Kansas-Nebraska War, or
Bleeding Kansas.
Bleeding Kansas. He was very involved in all kinds of things in the 40s and 50s, and of course culminating in the raid on Harper's Ferry. And he and Douglass were very great. I don't know that I want to say friends, but they had a very great relationship. They were compatriots at the very least.
Yeah.
Brown stayed with Douglass. Douglass stayed with Brown at various points during the 1850s, and they were very much of a same mind. Slavery must die, and so they were. And Brown came to, Douglass came to Brown's way of thinking in that, yeah, it's going to be violent, which I found very interesting.
Yeah.
Because even though words were his primary tool, he came to realize, largely through his association with John Brown, it seems, that it would be inevitable that it was going to lead to armed conflict.
Yeah.
And I think he came to this far sooner than most
Lincoln
were willing to
Lincoln
go.
hoped it was always avoidable until...
Well, yeah. Well, when you are not a slave,
Yeah.
I think it's easy to hope that it's avoidable.
Yeah, absolutely.
But when you were obviously Douglass was not a slave at this point, but he was one. When you see what's going on and that absolute control, I think he came to realize that he probably knew this early on, but I think by the time the 1850s are there and he's with Brown, he's realized that no amount of words are going to convince the South to give up their slaves.
That's right.
And so he was perfectly willing to go down that road. And I think he probably thought of that was going to be an armed rebellion, like John Brown wanted to institute. He thought Brown was a little bit crazy in what he had hoped to do. Like Brown, he was literally wanting to start a slave rebellion and start a new country within the South. We even had a constitution drawn up to establish this. Well, that was never going to work either.
Well, Spartacus was one of his heroes,
Yes.
and that's that whole Servile War. He's looking back to that and recognizing, he almost did it. If we just fix a few things, we can make that
Right,
happen.
it's almost like socialism. It just hasn't been tried the right way.
That's right.
It's like, well, no, that's not true either.
Yeah.
But
And then with Douglass, then he comes to understand, okay, yes, there's probably going to be something violent here, but at the same time, there has to be some meaning in law
yes,
to eventually affect the change we want to see,
He's fighting the same war on a different battlefield.
and,
Right.
and on a higher plane.
That's very
well,
much so.
yeah, because I think, and again, this is a little bit conjecture on my part from what I have read. I think what Douglass realizes, even though it will take violence, the violence has to be guaranteed by the rule of law, ultimately.
Yes.
Because the law has enslaved the black man, the law must also free him.
Right.
It has to guarantee his freedom. Otherwise, it's meaningless.
Yes.
Because as we see after Reconstruction, it largely was meaningless because it was no longer enforced in the South the way it should have been. And, I think that's a prime example of how we failed the legacy of the Civil War in the South is that, not that Reconstruction should have gone on an unending thing, but when the North finally got tired of occupying the South, we basically left them to their own devices, thinking, well, they're reconstructed, they're fine now. No. A lot of blacks are still in the South. They weren't exactly returned to slavery, but they weren't exactly free anymore either.
There's politically nullified.
Yeah, politically nullified. And once you politically nullify them, it is much easier to subjugate them in other ways.
Just in other ways, that's right.
Yeah. So I think Douglass realized that the law has to guarantee the freedom that the arms will win for you.
Yes.
And that, of course, ultimately it means amended the Constitution.
Yes.
That's where.
Yeah.
Right.
So
which is something by 1865 Lincoln understands very well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's again, without the one, the other is meaningless. You could make the argument that, well, just because you've outlawed slavery doesn't necessarily mean that they're citizens and can vote now, does it? Well, yeah, actually it should.
It should.
Because are they not men? Well, that's part of the problem. They were not seen as men. So you have...
We are Devo.
Yeah, that's right.
sorry. All right.
A very strange rabbit hole you've struck us down there, Martinius.
I applaud you, sir.
Sometimes things just have to get out or they'll make my head hurt. Are we not
excellent.
men? We are Devo.
Oh, awesome.
So
love it. Love any reference to 80s alternative music, man. That's awesome. Oh, my goodness.
Well, fellas, it's been a tremendous episode.
Yes, we've whipped it good, have we not?
Oh, but phrasing.
That's right.
Phrasing.
Yeah. That's bad phrasing. Yes. We pummeled that expired equine, maybe, but yeah.
But this is great because we touched on the oratory, the skills with words, and how important that is.
And in his career, we've only talked just up to the Civil War.
Yeah.
We're 46 minutes into this, but there's really a lot more. And
he keeps he keeps touring, he keeps talking, speech after speech, all throughout the Reconstruction period, and again keeps writing the final biography. Again, not released until the 1880s. But just a leader and someone who knew how to affect political change. Again, is in Lincoln's ear, helping Lincoln understand that it's not going to be enough to preserve the Union. You have to preserve it for a purpose. And also at the same time, that just freeing the slaves without preserving the Union also accomplishes nothing. So he helps Lincoln realize the two goals are intertwined.
Yeah.
And again, this really amazing, terrific leadership, very worthy of study and emulation.
Long-lived, too. He's on the world stage for decades upon decades.
Yes.
And that helps solidify and the concrete of his ideas.
It's amazing the man was never assassinated. It really is. When you think about he traveled freely in the North. Obviously, he didn't travel freely in the South because he would have been picked up immediately or shot, definitely.
But he traveled in Europe and all across the U.S.
Yeah.
And just this influential leader and speaker.
He was there decades. At the unveiling of that statue, which has come into recent criticism, where Lincoln has, he's standing above the slave who has been freed.
Yeah.
He actually did a big speech at the unveiling of that. It was done at the American Centennial, so it was part of that celebration of the 100 years, and also the 10 years after the Civil War, and it's the speech he gave at that. Blight goes over it, and actually pretty well. Again, a little flowery, but he was very much a firebrand. And he talked about it in that speech. We've come very far. We still have a long way to go.
There's a long way to go.
Right. And it sounded almost modern. It almost sounded like it was written or spoken by somebody who was a civil rights activist today. And to me, that was fascinating.
Well, yeah, because he is in many respects the model for all that.
He is, but it's just how modern he sounded to our ears. In many ways, it shows not much has changed, but obviously so much has changed.
Right.
But the struggle is still traced very much back to him.
Right.
Yeah.
It was his ideas that Dr. King and so many others brought forward into the next century.
He helps exemplify that it's a universal struggle.
Yes.
Well, that's exactly it. Yeah, that's correct.
And, I think one of the things that
the articulation may change, but the principles themselves
they are timeless.
Are timeless.
And to me, that's one of the things that I really like about him is that timelessness of his message. Because obviously, to us, it seems obvious because we did not grow up with slaves. All of us, I think, would have looked at anybody. Well, they're just people,
right?
I mean, that's has always been the way. I remember thinking about anybody who has looked different because it's just not been my mental frame of mind.
Well, I think that's generational too.
It's generational. We're probably that first generation where that started to take hold.
Well, because we're post Civil Rights Act.
We are, yes.
We were born right at that time.
He appeals to me also because he is largely self-made. Now, obviously, he has help along the way.
Yes.
Well, you're exactly right on that because he should not have been able to do what he did.
His future wife, who was already in the North,
yes,
sent money to help him with the train ride, and so there were people who did help along
there's
the way.
The woman, Mrs. Auld, that teaches him to write.
Yeah.
All of these people helped shape him along the way, but the bulk of the work is started and continued and comes to fruition on his own.
It's up
because
to him.
There were no other options for him other than self.
That's right. There's no institution that he can go to that will give him what he eventually finds on his own. Lincoln, ironically, of course, was kind of the same way.
Exactly.
Although he did it his own way, the institutions were open to him.
They were.
Because of race. But because of economics, not so much.
Not so much.
Yeah, well, even if he had the money, I think he probably would have been not barred, but not accepted in a lot of the institutions. Because he did not have the formal education
he didn't have the
from
pedigree.
The beginning.
That's right.
So, or the pedigree. Pedigree is also very important back then. I mean, it still is.
Yeah.
But yeah, that self-madeness is to me is phenomenal because of the context.
That's right.
Yeah. Tremendous. All right, fellas, that's pretty nice job.
We almost need like 3 more episodes to really cover him.
Yeah, to really give a full biography of the man. It's just not possible.
I do recommend the book by Blight.
Yeah.
With reservations.
With some reservations over the language. But again, I will endeavor. I'll probably have to do a series of blog posts to really do this justice.
As you slog through it, just plop one in.
Yeah, I really do. I need to start taking some notes to.
That would be helpful. Yeah, because that make it a series because Douglass is so big,
exactly,
and so important.
And
to do him justice,
he obviously does not get the attention. There's not been a movie made about Douglass, but my God, what a movie!
Yeah, it could be a tremendously compelling
Could be tremendous.
Story. Yeah.
I mean, if you can make a movie out of Team of Rivals, which is essentially what Lincoln is.
That's right, yeah.
Surely you could make a movie out of Douglass's life.
Yeah.
I would think so, too.
So we will be checking back in with you.
Absolutely.
Online,
oh, my God, I've got homework.
Live. Robert's coming out of this episode with homework. Francis, buddy, what is next time?
Pop culture again, guys.
Woo-hoo.
Which we always love that. Hey, it's back to our next installment, 3rd edition, as it were, of those movies we always have to watch. Those ones, as it says, where when we run into these on television, everything stops, you sit your butt down and you finish it, no matter where you started off on it. So you know it so well, and yet you keep going back to it over and over and over again. Movies that are worth rewatching. We love them. We know you're going to love them too.
Hope you enjoyed another pointless discussion of eternal questions. Remember, new episodes published every Friday at noon Eastern.
Spread the word. We're on all the major podcast platforms. And leave us a comment or review because that helps others find us.
We're on Instagram, Twitter, as well as our website, snakesandotters.com.
I'm Martin.
And I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis. Join us next week. Same snake time, same otter channel.